united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
If we do not renew our partnerships with the rest of the world, Europe will not be relevant.
We can make it if we are together as Europeans.
Do you genuinely believe that countries will manage to reach these very ambitious targets?
Good afternoon, everybody. We're very excited to have you here for our panel discussion on drug shortages. My name is Rory O'Neill. I'm a health reporter at Politico. So we've already heard quite a bit today about Europe's drug shortage crisis. So now we're going to try and figure out some of the solutions. So Oliver Varhelyi, the likely next EU Health Commissioner, promised MEPs a couple of weeks ago that he would aim to deliver a Critical Medicines Act within 100 days of taking the job. In the meantime, the Commission has already invited industry, civil society, and European governments to come together in the Critical Medicines Alliance to try and come up with a coordinated plan to solve drug shortages. All we're missing now is some detail on what the resulting legislation will actually look like. So for the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to try and unpack some of the policies that Europe needs to secure its supply of critical medicines and avert shortages that will ultimately put patients' lives at risk. We will be asking questions. You will get the opportunity to ask questions, rather. So there'll be a dedicated Q&A for our audience later on. So start having to think about any questions you'd like to ask. And if you're on X or indeed another platform, you can use the hashtag Politico Healthcare. So joining me today, we have Olivier Girard, Head of Unit for Medical Countermeasures at the European Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority, better and more conveniently known as HERA. We have Adrian van den Hoven, Director General for Medicines for Europe. We have Katrin Kisk, Director General of the State Agency of Medicines in Estonia. And we have Dr. Nenad Milkovic, President of the European Association of Hospital Pharmacists. You're all very welcome. Thank you. So I'd like to start with a question for all of you, if that's okay. Oliver Varhelyi says he will have a Critical Medicines Act on the table within 100 days of taking the job. That could be any day now. When he does, what is the single most important thing that you would like to see in there that you think needs to be in there to tackle drug shortages? Olivier, what does HERA want to see in there?
Well, I don't think I'm the best person to ask for this because clearly, I'm on the other side. I'm on the receiving end of the expectations of your guests around the table. So I would be on the listening mode. We are on the listening mode as far as the Alliance is concerned, and all the guests today are actually members of the Alliance, so we are really, really listening to them. All what I can say is that we have everything in place so that we are able to deliver on this promise, thanks to the Alliance, thanks to all the preparatory work that has gone into this project since the spring of 23, sorry. So we are very pleased and very much ready about the next steps. But then about, what are the expectations, what should be in the Act, I would definitely prefer to leave it to those who are actually going to be the beneficiary of the Act, who are going to be the ones waiting for the Act. So, yeah, that would be my response.
Thank you. Adrian, what would you like to see from the Critical Medicines Act?
Well, we're very excited, actually, that the potential commissioner has announced this would be delivered quickly. I think the main challenge we have in the European Union is that on the critical medicines list, you have 80 or 90% of those are older generic medicines. Generic medicines are about 70% of the prescriptions supply in Europe, so it's hugely important for the functioning of healthcare systems. The challenge we face is that we don't have a policy and a market in Europe that incentivizes investment in manufacturing and resilient supply chains to encourage more supply, more diversity, So I'd like to see really concrete measures in there to change the European policy and the European markets to incentivize this investment in manufacturing and resilient supply chains.
Katrin, what's your priority for the Critical Medicines Act? What do you think needs to be prioritized?
Yeah, at first I would like to start with metaphor, just to give a background, the country where I come from, and also it gives hints about the attractiveness of the medicinal product market. So one of our presidents has said that Estonia is like a wild strawberry, small and difficult to find, also for marketing authorization holders. So we really we expect any actions towards to improving the availability of medicinal products availability, yeah, and also the Critical Medicines Act. It has to complement the new pharma law, definitely, and there are also a lot of statements already in, but maybe we need an extra flexibilities, regulatory flexibilities, maybe only electronic package leaflet, for instance, or exemptions from the labeling requirements. So not every language, but maybe only in English.
Thank you. And Nanad?
Well, on behalf of healthcare professionals, I can only say that we really want that this act enables access to at least critical medicines. So physicians, hospital pharmacists, nurses could dedicate their time more to care of patients. And finally, we really want to see tangible results of this act and quick results, because what we've seen so far is a lot of attempts, a lot of documents, but in real practice, in everyday life, we do still face shortages of all medicines, not to mention critical medicines.
Can I stick with you on that point, Nanad, actually, because pharmacists are really at the front line of the shortages crisis. I know you've been, the profession that is, has been sounding the alarm over this for many years now. Your organization keeps a very close eye on the situation on the ground. Can you tell us briefly, what does the situation in Europe look like at the moment?
Well, we've heard today several times by Natalie shared responsibility. I would add to that shared solutions and shared access to information. Our society, European Hospital Association of Hospital Pharmacists, started investigating shortages more than 10 years ago. And when we published the first report, everyone was rather skeptical about the results. Now, 10 years later, we still publish the same report, and we see an increase, unfortunately, in three main categories when it comes to clinical impact to patients: delays in care, cancelled care, and less optimized care. And this is really alarming. So I can say that we will still continue analyzing the situation, but this year, in June, we adopted a position paper on shortages of both medicinal products and medical devices, and we do think that shared work is really inevitable if we want to tackle shortages in a more concrete way and with a more tangible results for our patients.
Katrin, what's the supply situation like in Estonia at the moment? I mean, we've heard from we've heard what's happening in the Czech Republic earlier. The Deputy Health Minister acknowledged that there have been a lot of issues in recent years. The government has been very vocal about that. I think you were saying earlier there's some indications that the situation is improving a little bit. Has that been Estonia's experience? How has Estonia grappled with shortages in recent years?
Okay, we are receiving about 400 notification shortages from marketing authorization holders per year. And that's critical that 33% of them, there are no alternative products in our market. So it makes really the situation complicated for doctors and for patients as well. So their treatment has to be adjusted, and which may not so effective and safe for their health. And also the doctors, as the pressure, they have to find out a suitable alternative. Yeah, and we as an authority, what we can do then? So we have Baltic labeling package since 2005 already. We have an agreement between Baltic states and mutual or joint procedure to approve it, just for broadening the market. We can allow foreign language packages, also unauthorized products to the market. We have monitoring system in place, so two wholesalers, two bigger one who covers 80% of the market. They report us their stock data weekly, so we can analyze them and report back if they need to increase the stock. We also have safety stock with 116 medicinal products, which covers 1 month and a half treatment. And we also have a right for export bans, which we are not using often. This is extraordinary, of course, but it may happen once or twice per year. And of course, just what we have from MEA, so we have a solidarity mechanism we can use. So we haven't used it, but I know there are 4 positive cases already. So that's a package what we can do.
Sure. Many of the drugs that are in short supply are at the greatest risk of shortages are mostly the generics, everyday medicines that typically don't cost very much. Adrian, the generics industry has said for some time that the price of many of these medicines is just too low to be viable. I'll start with you and throw the question open to everybody, but is there any way to protect our supply of critical medicines without paying more for them, in your opinion?
Well, I think it depends on what you mean by paying more for them. So I think it's very, very clear, and we have, one of our companies has done a study using IQVIA data showing the extreme consolidation of the generics markets in each member state in the European Union. So around 70% of them have less than 2 or 3 suppliers of the same generic product, let's say. It's even worse for antibiotics and for generic cancer medicines. Okay, so you have an even higher consolidation there. So the problem with this is that the same research group, IQVIA, has shown that 66% of the shortages of generic medicines involve these medicines with very high consolidation. So where there are a few suppliers, you have 66% chance of a shortage. So it's very clear that we have a market system in Europe that is driving towards fewer and fewer generic suppliers. So how do you solve that? Well, the Commission is actually working on, not Olivier, but his colleagues over at DG Santé, are working on how to reform procurement rules. So you can have more suppliers. Instead of having just one supplier through a tender, let's say, can you have multiple? Of course, it has to be a certain size of tender. There are also in European countries, almost all countries in Europe have something called a reference price, which is basically a regulated price. Okay, and this means the price is fixed, so it stays the same forever, or it can be reduced, but it cannot increase most of the time. And so there are models that can be used. There are some experiments in Sweden, in Portugal, in Canada, and different places of how to have like a modulated fixed price, one that goes up and down based on the number of suppliers. So these are concepts, that we could introduce in Europe. The problem is that member states, they make their own decisions, they make their own impacts. We see some smaller member states making these changes, but the big member states, they don't want to go down this path. They want to keep, let's say, the price pressure there because that's good for cost containment. So I think something has to give because clearly this is driving shortages. The data is pointing to it very, very clearly.
Olivia, what do you think? Does something have to give in our current model? And if so, what is it, do you think?
I think that if we have decided to go for a Critical Medicines Act, it's because we see the need for more coordination in the way we work. COVID-19, of course, is a source of inspiration. It showed that when you work together to address access to medicines, you can deliver. You can deliver at EU level, and you can avoid suboptimal scenarios. So the idea of a Critical Medicines Act is that you develop a coordinated approach, coordinated tools to identify, to prevent, and to address shortages, but from the industrial point of view, because of course there are a lot of tools which are currently in use, like the one just mentioned, voluntary solidarity mechanism, possibility to move the stocks around. We need to be able to do also a common approach on investment, support to manufacturing, possibly procurement, possibly also capacity reservation, and also looking for partners, because supply chains for medicines are international, and clearly we need to rely on the EU, but we need also to rely on third partners. So on all this, we need to do this in a coordinated way with all the member states around the table. This is a model that we have developed in other areas, industrial areas, but here, of course, you have the additional dimension that we are working for the benefit of the patient, so we need also, of course, the competent authorities in the picture.
Mm-hmm. I mean, just to follow up on something you said there, I mean, I think a lot of the debate around drug shortages and the solutions is focused on reshoring production to Europe. The desirability of that as a solution and how it would work. I mean, is the strategy starting to evolve, do you think, to incorporate,
Of course, I'm not prejudging what's going to be into the act. At the same time, it's easy for me to tell you what we are discussing in the alliance. And there we are looking at different ways to improve the security of supply, to securize the supply of critical medicines. And you have different ways to achieve that. Of course, you have the EU manufacturing base, which is absolutely crucial in delivering this. It saved us during COVID when it comes to vaccine production. So clearly we have an incentive, a very strong incentive to support and strengthen the manufacturing base in Europe. But also it is on our interest to develop partnership with third countries, because we should not also forget that third countries are actually relying on EU manufacturing, on EU exports. So it's I would say, a give and take agenda when it comes to third countries. So there are different ways of achieving security of supply. And so we are looking at all of this in the alliance.
Okay. Let's stick with the issue of procurement for a moment, which has come up a couple of times. Nanad, in your organization's recent position paper on shortages, it said that you want procurement models that are not solely based on a winner-takes-all concept. Can you tell us about what are the solutions you're looking at here? What kind of model would you like to see?
Yes, we witnessed in Europe that in those countries where the price is the only criteria, obviously, as Adrian mentioned, the price went down, and then suddenly, in the first year of the tender or on the tendering procedure, we just see less and less medicine. So obviously something is wrong in the mechanism where the price is the sole criteria for procuring the medicines. What we've seen from the experience from our colleagues from the US, they are performing a very complex analysis when it comes to procurement, such as quality manufacturing, maturity level, API sourcing, supply chain resilience, how they behave in certain situations. So I think that the time has come for our partners to accept different models of procurement, which means that the price will not be the only determining factor, because just having a low price and not having medicines will definitely not solve the problem. So we do hope that multiple winners, as we mentioned already, would be an option for that. But this means that the whole system has to be changed. And of course, when it comes to the centralized procurement procedures, all stakeholders should be involved, which means that you cannot have procurement strategy defined solely by the industry or the government. You need to have wholesalers, API producers, hospital pharmacists, so you can really find the best model which could assure that you will be able to provide medicines to patients.
Mm-hmm. Katrin, does Estonia have a position on this debate around procurement models, or Europe's is the way Europe does procurement need reform?
At first, I would like to say that due to complexity of the chain and so many key players and so many different root causes of the shortages, we need comprehensive and really broad set of measures. And maybe, yes, the pricing and the procurements are also part of it. So, yeah, I agree.
Okay, thank you. Olivier, can we talk about the Critical Medicines Alliance for a moment? It's been very busy at work all this year, but we haven't heard too much publicly. So when should we expect to get the Alliance's recommendations on how to solve the shortages crisis?
Sure. So in terms of deliveries, the recommendation and the strategic report of the Alliance, the first strategic report of the Alliance should come up at the beginning of 25. The Alliance has a mandate of 5 years, so it will be really the first deliverable. But as we are talking about industry challenge, manufacturing challenge, those challenges are extremely complex, so by definition there will be further work going ahead. But indeed, the first report, the first recommendation should come at the beginning of 25. We are planning to finalize the draft of the report, hopefully by the end of the year, beginning of next year, and then to make sure that the Alliance as a whole is consulted on the report. When I say we, I'm talking evidently of the working groups of the Alliance, which are made up of representative stakeholders from industry, from health professionals, from member states, from national competent authorities, and so forth. So what is important, of course, is that those recommendations are ready before the Critical Medicine Act comes up. So in terms of political cycle, it puts a lot of pressure on the participants of the Alliance, and of course we are aware of that, but at the same time we see it as an opportunity which should not be missed, because as there is a commitment to come quickly with the Critical Medicine Act, we need to have evidence to bring to the legislators when the legislation will come up. And what is going to come from the Alliance, of course, will be absolutely decisive in this process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think with the political focus that's on this issue at the moment in the Critical Medicines Act, people will be very keenly looking out for that report. Is there a specific deadline in place for?
It has been indicated that indeed the Critical Medicine Act should come very early in the mandate of the new Commission. I cannot say what date it's going to be at this point in time. We need to wait for the new Commission. We need to wait for the work program of the Commission for 2025, but the Act will be there, and it will come very quickly, that's for sure.
Okay. Katrin, can I ask, I think one thing with the Critical Medicines Alliance will be the sort of the outcomes that come at the end of it. But another thing that people really wanted from the Alliance, I think, would be that it gets everyone talking to each other from different countries, different sectors, and so on, which is sort of the prerequisite for any coordinated action. Do you think the Alliance has enabled that, in your opinion? Have we made progress on having a more coordinated response to drug shortages across Europe, or do we need to do better on that, do you think?
I think a lot has been done already. So it's a priority thing for European Commission and all stakeholders now. And yeah, but maybe there is a room for a little improvement as well. For instance, in case of procurement, joint procurements, and etc. So it's quite good now, I think. Yeah. And I want to point out that despite of the regulation and strategies, I think that collaboration between all the key players continues to be crucial. So willingness to act quickly with enthusiasm and so on, it's rather a question of values. So, yeah.
Okay. Can I ask, we heard from the Deputy Health Minister of the Czech Republic earlier, who I think very notably had said earlier termed the response of some countries, Germany, for example, who've taken on national stockpiling requirements, that this is a stupid strategy. Ultimately, it's reckless and sort of threatens supplies across Europe. What do we think? I mean, would you agree with that? I mean, do you think the stockpiling requirements that some countries have put in place are reckless?
So, as a risk minimization measure, we need the stockpiling, I think. But this has to be very carefully, this planning has to be reasonable time in advance, so not to affect other markets. And maybe we also have to think how many months it has to be covered, this stock. So it's 1 month or 3 or half a year. So maybe there also need some minimum requirements for stockpiling. I don't know.
Yeah, and Adrian, as the minister was saying earlier,
he's 100% correct. So I agree. He uses sometimes tough words, but on this one, he's 100% correct. The stockpiling the combined stockpiling requirements of France and Germany, okay, for 4 months and 6 months respectively, are equivalent to the total annual consumption of 10 of their neighboring countries, okay? We have constrained supply chains, okay, because the pharmaceutical industry is still coming out of a post-COVID supply chain shock, let's say a war in Ukraine supply chain shock, so the supply chains are struggling, let's put it this way. And then now we have to put a massive stockpile in place for France and Germany, and that stockpile can only be for France and for Germany, right? So this is reserved for Germans, for French people. I'm half French, so I'm glad for that. But what about the Estonians? What about the other countries who also need supplies? This is tying up stocks. This is limiting the ability for EU solidarity. If there's a shortage in Estonia, you cannot use the German or French stock to send it there, or you get a massive fine. And I'm talking millions and millions of euros in fines. So no company is going to, unfortunately, take that risk. So we're putting, stockpiling in France and Germany ahead of patient supply in smaller countries around Europe. And this is really unfortunate. It goes against everything we learned from COVID, which is that, yes, you need to have some inventories, yes, you need to have some buffer, et cetera, but the key is to make the medicines flow to where the patient need is, not to leave it in giant warehouses sitting there being unused. And so this is extremely unfortunate, and I think the words of the Czech Deputy Minister are absolutely accurate.
Mm-hmm. Nanad, as I think we've heard, I think those who have a stake in this are excited that there'll be quick political action on shortages. But even still, I mean, this has been, as you were saying earlier, this has been a crisis for quite some time, and it's a problem we're still dealing with as we speak. Is there anything, rather than just, waiting for a big piece of legislation, which will probably take a long time, is there anything we can be that you're calling for, any kind of action that we can take now to try and alleviate some of the pressure on the front line?
Mm-hmm. Well, we mentioned stockpiles. Obviously, we need stockpiling. Even in a hospital setting, you need to have some kind of a risk assessment which will help you to have reserves. But exactly as it was previously mentioned, we can't even move medicines from a hospital to a hospital in a single country. Not talking about moving medicines from a country to a country or to have a shared stock. But what would be really and amazing to achieve, and that's for Critical Medicines Alliance really exists, and we have a wonderful chance to talk among each other and to express our views, is if we have a stock, then this stock should be shared. Of course, this is so much easier to say than to put it in practice, but we really need to be careful with these kind of measures and to try to see what is going to work in a country and in a hospital. So I definitely think that stockpiling should be discussed in a very coordinated and rational manner, because we face it in our hospitals. We know what it means when you don't have a stock and when you can't borrow a medicine. So I have to say that hospital pharmacists are mitigating shortages on a daily basis, but usually they are very silent. So sometimes the managers, they don't even know that we solved 50 shortages, but there will be a moment in the future where we will not be able to solve a shortage and to substitute it. So I think that discussion around stockpiles should be really brought to a level which will help not 2 or 3 countries, but most of the countries to have a quick action. And when I say we want quick results, I'm saying that when we talk about short-term measures, again, from the hospital or patient perspective, even at the primary care, we want to get medicine as quickly as possible. Because a patient would not like to listen about this legislation or this amendment, or they just want to get a medicine, and we want to provide the service, a quality service, of course.
Yeah, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, and I think the associations also previously advocated for hospital pharmacists having the ability to compound. Is that part of the toolkit? Can you explain to us a little bit about what that is and why you think it's important, and if you think that needs to be in the debate here?
Yes, absolutely, but compounding is often misinterpreted by other stakeholders. So when we say compounding, we explicitly say that we would compound those unlicensed essential medicines affected by a shortage. So if we have a licensed medicine which is affected by a shortage for a certain group of patients, and those patients have a particular pharmaceutical, medicinal, or a personal indication that you cannot provide a medicine, or the medicine is not at the market because of the shortage, then you compound. And we have hospital pharmacies across Europe with high standards, so obviously they are supervised and coordinated, so obviously they should be allowed. Just to remind you, when we had a shortage of pediatric formulations of antibiotics, obviously if we didn't compound, the kids, they would never would have a chance to get a medicine. So yes, we do advocate for compounding, but clearly underlining, and this is for those medicines affected by a shortage, so this is some kind of a replacement compounding for authorized medicines which are not on the market due to a shortage or other issues.
Adrian, what's the generics industry's take on compounding? Is this a useful solution that we should consider?
Well, certainly hospital pharmacists have technical competence in most cases to be able to do compounding, and even some hospitals do have compounding centers, because even some of the medicines we deliver have to be compounded. So this is also sometimes something that they have to do. So this is certainly not something we are opposed to. I think, though, if we look at the scale of the problem, this is not going to be a major solution unless hospitals would then develop massive, large-scale systems, which probably would not be very economically efficient. I also think in terms of hospitals, if you see some of the challenges in hospitals, they have a shortage of human resources in almost every professional domain, I would guess. So actually, the way we see the future of hospital medicines is that we have to deliver more ready-made medicines to the hospitals, because they're running out of people who can do this kind of compounding. Even if the ones who are there maybe have this skill set, they don't have the time or the resources. That usually would be the pharmacist or the nurse in some certain circumstances. So we're looking at it, actually the future is more ready to administer drugs to be delivered to the hospital to lower the pressure on human resources. So although I see, maybe on a very small scale this issue, I don't see it as a fundamental solution.
Okay, another potential solution that's arisen in the debate is Sweden, for example, has talked about potential role for state-owned companies to be on standby to assist with drug production where necessary. Is that something we should be considering at the EU level or as part of the Critical Medicines Act? Olivier, maybe you can tell us if that line of argument has come up in the debate. so far?
We have heard it, of course. We do hear about proposals to develop such a capacity either at national level or at EU level to support it. We are looking at different tools at the moment whereby the state could actually support the production of medicines which are out of the market, how they could do that from a competition point of view. I mean, those are new concepts, there are new ways of using the tools. This is typically the kind of design work that the Alliance is doing with the Alliance member working together with with the Commission departments, in that case, the Competition Department. So we are looking at ways where state could intervene indeed to support production where there is a market failure. Of course, there are different ways of doing that because it can also be support to private companies. But this is something which is worth exploring in the sense that indeed we are talking about products which are mature. I mean, the list of critical medicines is 80% generic and 20% innovative, or 19-10, depends on the appreciation. But we are also looking at ways where state could step in to support companies to address market failure. This is something we are looking at. Yes.
Thank you. And Adrian, I mean, is there a market failure here that the state needs to step in to try and correct? What's your take on that solution?
I think it's partially a market failure. So, I mean, basically, for generic medicines in the European Union, we don't have a true free market. We don't set our prices. We are given a price by the different member states, and then you have maybe tendering or some kind of other system through which the competition operates, but you really don't have a true free price market where prices go up and down like you do in other sectors. So I think this is either a market failure or a policy failure, because the problem with this system is that the prices can only go down. So obviously we talk a lot about antibiotics, right? Well, most of the generic antibiotics have been on the market as generics for a long, long time, which means their price was set 10, 20, 25 years ago. Since that time, we've had, quite a bit of inflation, for example. So obviously this, doesn't work after a certain amount of time. That's why a lot of this pressure is on the legacy products or on smaller volume products like oncology drugs or pediatric drugs, for example, which are very health critical. So I think that needs to be corrected. There is another factor, which is health security. So this is relatively new. I would say 5 years ago, we kind of talked about this, but no one talked about geopolitics as being a major factor in the pharmaceutical industry. No one really paid much attention to this. It was a globalized industry. It is a globalized industry. Today, geopolitics has become central. We've seen a lot of tussling between countries during COVID over stocks, all kinds of maneuvering that was done to try and keep the market open and products flowing. It was not easy. We see a lot of geopolitical tensions. Obviously, there's the war in Ukraine. We don't import a lot of medicines from Ukraine, but it had an impact on our sector. We had to supply a lot of medicines to Ukraine. So I think these kind of things are new, and we have to take that on board. And one of the issues that we do have in Europe is that we have to reinvest in some manufacturing in Europe again. We have to work with partners who make reciprocal commitments to us as we make to them from a health security perspective. And I genuinely believe we need to do this now and not wait for another major geopolitical event to make us ask the question, why didn't we do that a few years ago?
Okay, great. I think at this point it would be good to see if we have any questions from our audience. So raise your hands if there's anything you'd like to ask. Yeah, okay, we have one in the front row. Just ask everybody before we go if you could keep your questions snappy and say who you are and who you're affiliated with. And if your question is directed to a particular speaker, please just identify that to start. So we have a question in the front. I think we have a microphone for you.
Thank you so much. much. So my name is Roy Wadia. I'm from the World Health Organization. Just wondering what, if any, impact the incoming administration in the States may have on the scenario that you've been spelling out here. Thank you.
Do we have any more? One right behind, yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Agata Kusiak from the European Society for Medical Oncology. So I have a question to all of the panelists. In your view, the strategic action plan of the Critical Medicines Alliance, how will it address supply chain challenges of the critical cancer medicines, given the ongoing revision of the EU critical medicines list? And how, or to what extent, will all of this inform the upcoming Critical Medicines Act? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we'll take that off you. Thank you very much. Okay, so if we start with the first question on the incoming US administration, who is dying to take that one first?
Yeah, so I think actually on this issue of security of supply of medicines and medicine shortages, there's actually quite a bit of bipartisan alignment in the US on the need to reduce shortages and to make the US medicines production, supply chains, et cetera, more secure. I think the difficulty the US faces, which is a little bit different to Europe, is the US has very little production of active pharmaceutical ingredients, especially of legacy generic drugs, let's say, and heavily dependent on China and India, as we are, but they're even more dependent, I would say. And I don't think the US can make its own API industry overnight. So it will need partners. If it does not want to partner with China, which may be one of the things they're considering, then it will need to partner maybe with the European Union, maybe with India, maybe with both, because this is not something you can build overnight. You need really specialized chemistry capabilities. And so I think the US will also have to partner. Maybe it will choose Europe, maybe it will choose India, maybe it will choose some other regions, but I think there's an opportunity for Europe to cooperate with both parties in the US on this, I'd say.
Olivier, is the US one of the partners under consideration?
So obviously, we are working with US companies in the alliance. I mean, they are very big players in Europe, and so they bring their international vision, their international perspective, their reliance on international value chains. And so it's not a zero-sum game, as we were discussing earlier. It's clearly a situation where we are dependent on each other. And obviously, we value the work and the contribution of all the US partners in the alliance. But it is true that on many occasions, the US are also reliant on us. So we shall see how it plays. But I think we are starting from a situation where pretty much interdependent from each other. So that's for the US. Then on your question on oncology products, I mean, the way things should work and the way the alliance is looking at this is that obviously the starting point is the need for common European action, and the need for common European action will stem from the fact that those products are on the list, which is defined by the EMA as a starting point. We need to focalize and to work together on a common frame of reference. And then on the basis of our common work, we will develop an assessment where we will identify where the vulnerabilities are. And the vulnerabilities can stem indeed from the fact that some of those products only have, as Adrian said, only one supplier left in the EU. That could be a possibility, or that the supply chain for those products is heavily reliant on one region of the world. And then on this basis, we will try to encourage diversification. This can go via procurement. This can go via common tools at EU level. We can support additional supply of those products, additional suppliers coming into the market via support to investment. So that would be the logic, that would be the philosophy that the stakeholders are pretty much supporting in the alliance right now. Then we see, of course, how this turns into legislation. But that's the logic. The intervention of the EU needs to come where we have vulnerabilities. Anyway, the resources are limited, the tools are subject to strong financial constraints. So we need to choose our battles. We need to focus our game. But of course, this will be done on the basis of a permanent monitoring mechanism because it's an evolving situation. Supply chains are complex, they're constantly evolving, so there will need to be some kind of monitoring, and this monitoring will have to rely on tools which are non-bureaucratic because, of course, there's no question to overflow stakeholders, public authorities, industries with questionnaires and requests for data and so on. We need to rely on existing data. But at the same time, we need to be constantly assessing and checking those supply chains like we do in other areas, like, for instance, in the field of critical raw materials, where we need to have an updated list on a permanent basis. So that would be the way at least the stakeholders anticipate how Critical Medicines Act would work.
If I can just say on these cancer products, especially the older legacy products, we absolutely need to change how these medicines are purchased and procured. We have clear examples from Germany of the procurement system generating a shortage of critical older cancer drugs. We have, these are low volume, very complex to make, very toxic, so a lot of environmental challenges in terms of the production and kind of things of these drugs. So there is really an extreme consolidation around legacy cancer drugs, which are needed in almost all treatments, even if you have a novel drug with it. This is an unworkable market. So these products have to be treated differently in the purchasing because they are ultra critical. And I don't understand why this is so difficult to discuss with procurers and with payers when it's super critical, obviously, for the patients who need these.
I just had one more question for everybody before we finish. As I mentioned a couple of times, we now have this target hanging over us of Critical Medicines Act within 100 days, whenever the clock starts ticking on that. But it's a very ambitious timeline. Is it achievable? Nanad?
Well, we hope that we will get some results in this year. In terms of recommendations, we surely expect that we will have our input listened wisely by other stakeholders. But I have to address the question from our colleague about oncology medicines, what we didn't mention, that we talked about investments, diversification, cooperation between stakeholders, but we should bear in mind also the API production. So obviously, before we reach out to finished dosage forms producers and before we tackle stockpiles and supply chain and procurement, we really need to think where the APIs are produced and how and if we would like to have them back in Europe, and what kind of conditions we need to fulfill in terms of EU itself, neighboring countries, third countries. So I just want to mention that while waiting for the Critical Medicines Act, we should do our best within the Critical Medicines Alliance to be prepared when the time comes for the implementation and to address these major burning issues which will allow us to get the finished product.
And thank you. And very quick fire from everybody. Katrin, is Varhelyi's timeline for Critical Medicines Act realistic?
So as I mentioned before, there are strong political and stakeholders' commitments, so I really hope so that this is achievable. So,
Adrian?
I guess it depends when the new commission starts. But no, I think it will be very, very challenging. But I think the good colleagues over at HERA can get to work and deliver on this timeline because they're all very brilliant, hardworking. You've even set up a meeting right before the Christmas break so that you can make a turkey and then we can discuss the Critical Medicines Alliance. So I think there's a lot of ambition there and we should go for it.
Olivier, are you looking forward to it next 100 days?
Very much looking forward to, thank you. But indeed, we do have a very strong team. We are relying on all the expertise from the Alliance member, and this is really taking place through almost daily meetings at the moment. And we are very happy also to be able to rely on the support from many Commission services, because it's not only about ERA, it's of course DG Santé, it's of course DG Comp, it's of course DG Trade, and the feedback and the commitment we get from all the services is excellent. So I think, you know, the team is ready, and it will be challenging, but I think we can deliver.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. We're unfortunately out of time for this discussion. Just before we go, up next we have a branded segment from our partner, the Plasma Protein Therapeutics Association. No magic bullet, why medicine shortages will require a multimodal approach. You'll be hearing from Giles Platverd, who's the chair of the Global Executive Board of Directors at the PPTA, and he is also the president of the Plasma-Derived Therapies Business Unit at Takeda Pharmaceuticals. So that's it from us. Please give a round of applause for our speakers. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much to the previous panel for their insightful discussion on medicine shortages. This is a critical challenge that affects both patients and society as a whole. And what I'd like to do today is really reinforce the importance of developing tailored solutions that recognize the unique supply chain challenges of different categories of medicines, whether that be vaccines, cell therapies, or plasma-derived medicines. Now, as the chair of the Global Executive Board of the Plasma Protein Therapeutics Association, otherwise known as PPTA, I'd like to offer perspective from the plasma industry, which has a strong manufacturing footprint in the European Union. My aim is to illustrate the practical implications of the challenges and opportunities discussed today, while underscoring the importance of flexible approaches and the value of inclusive dialogue. Additionally, I'd like to touch on the policy options to support reliable supply of plasma-derived medicines by addressing the root causes of shortages for these unique, life-saving and life-transforming medicines. Now, why is this important? Plasma-derived medicines are life-saving treatments that can only be produced from donated human plasma. They replace missing proteins in people with severe, life-threatening conditions, such as primary immunodeficiencies, hemophilia, and certain neurological conditions. For over 2 decades, global demand for plasma-derived medicines has consistently outpaced available supply. This trend is driven by earlier diagnosis, discovery of new therapeutic applications and indications for these treatments, higher standards of care, and expanded access globally. The consequences of shortages of these medicines can be profound for patients, for their families, and for their caregivers. The plasma-derived medicines most in demand, immunoglobulins, are included in the EU Critical Medicines List and WHO's Essential Medicines List. For many patients with primary immunodeficiency, immunoglobulins are not just an option. They are a necessity. They don't have alternative treatments available. Without regular infusions, these patients are vulnerable to recurring and severe infections, which could lead to complications such as pneumonia, sepsis, and even permanent organ damage. Beyond the physical toll these patients endure, also emotional and mental stress. They live with the constant uncertainty of when the next infection will strike. Limited availability of plasma therapies has a ripple effect across health systems. More frequent and severe infections for these patients lead to costly hospitalizations, intensive care stays, and increased demand for treatments to manage associated complications. Research estimates that the indirect costs of inadequate access to the right therapies at the right time range between 1.1 to 1.6 billion euros per year across the region. Ensuring a consistent and reliable supply of these vital medicines not only improves individual patient outcomes, it also reduces the long-term burden on national healthcare systems. This further illustrates the need for systematic, coordinated approaches in the EU and in its member states to manage and prevent shortages of these critical medicines. But these approaches need to be flexible and tailored to address the unique challenges of bringing these medicines through to patients. Plasma-derived medicines are much more costly and complex to manufacture than small molecule or even biologic medicines. The process from plasma collection through fractionation, purification, and viral inactivation to developing a final product can take 7 to 12 months. This makes it very difficult to respond quickly to sudden and unexpected surges in demand. And significant volumes of plasma are required. To give you an example, 130 donations of plasma are required to sustain the treatment for one primary immunodeficiency patient on an annual basis. However, Europe faces a 5 million litre gap between the plasma it requires and the plasma it actually collects. And as a result, Europe ends up importing from the United States 40% of the plasma needed to treat some 300,000 patients across the region who depend on plasma-derived therapies. This underscores the fragility of the current system and the need for innovative policy solutions. And while efforts are being made to safeguard supply of medicines, we must recognize that different categories of medicines require different strategies. For example, some member states are unilaterally increasing safety stock levels for medicines. Now, while this is well-intentioned, this approach is not the right solution for plasma-derived medicines, because increased stockpiling in one country decreases available supply elsewhere in a region where there's already a significant imbalance between supply and demand, and therefore increases the risk of shortages. And unlike many small molecule medicines, plasma-derived medicines have a limited shelf life. So stockpiling large quantities could lead to product expiry, resulting in wastage and ultimately increasing the risk of shortages. Instead, we must explore a more agile, collaborative framework across Europe that considers these unique challenges. In its February 2024 report on medical supply chains, the OECD advised that such a framework for plasma-derived medicines should include a combination of national policies, private sector involvement, and international cooperation to address the challenges in plasma collection, manufacturing, and supply. The most effective way to ensure a reliable supply of plasma-derived therapies in the EU member states is to address the root causes of shortages. And I'd like to highlight two actions that the EU can take to address these. Firstly, increasing plasma collection in Europe. EU countries must close the gap and reduce the reliance on imports from the US by expanding plasmapheresis, which is the most efficient way of donating plasma, and allowing the private sector to operate alongside public sector in doing so. Over the past 10 years, the private sector contributed heavily to the growth in plasma collection. In the EU, the private sector today collects almost half of all plasma in Europe from operations in only 4 countries where we are permitted to operate. Secondly, important that we improve the value recognition for plasma-derived medicines across Europe. It's important that the EU continues to develop procurement frameworks that fully recognize these life-saving treatments and the benefits they bring to patients, to health systems, and to society at large. With that certainty, we as an industry can continue to invest in the highly capital-intensive, long, complex, and risky process of ensuring continuity of supply and bringing new, innovative plasma-derived medicines through to the patients who highly depend on them. The EU Critical Medicines initiatives are a unique opportunity to bring flexible and tailored solutions that address the root causes of medicine shortages across Europe. We believe that successful approaches will ensure that all key stakeholders are at the table to support the development of sustainable and patient-centric solutions, enhance cooperation between countries and between the public and private sector, and recognize that the root causes of shortages differ from one medicine category to another. For plasma-derived medicines, this means increasing plasma collection and recognizing the value that these medicines bring to patients and to society at large. PPTA looks forward to playing an active role in the Critical Medicines Alliance and helping to build policies that will improve reliable access to plasma-derived medicines for patients in Europe who depend on these essential life-saving therapies. Thank you very much.